Our US correspondent, Rich Reynolds, in the studio with us. There's a whole lot of talking been going on.
Hola, chico.
How's it going?
It's going great.
Right.
Great. Better than it is back home.
Let's catch ourselves up on where we are internationally. US and Russian diplomats have agreed to restart diplomatic relations between the two countries and intend to appoint ambassadors as soon as possible to help with resolving any tensions that may arise in bilateral relations. As a second step, they intend to start formal consultations on a peace deal on Ukraine, with Russia waiting for the US to name its top team and negotiations expected to follow on a regular basis. The talks would include discussions on territory and security guarantees, as the priority would be on making it a permanent end to the war, the US said, but refused to discuss what it would mean for Crimea, for example. The US side has insisted that they would involve Ukraine and the European Union in the talks in some role, but without committing to giving them a place at the table. US State Secretary Marco Rubio said that everyone involved in that conflict has to be okay with it. It has to be acceptable to them, quote unquote. Any post-war peace guarantee would have to be European-led, US officials said, repeating calls for European allies to increase defence spending and praising the UK and France for talking about contributing more forcefully to Ukraine's security. But Russia ruled out any deployment of European peacekeeping forces to Ukraine, with Sergei Lavrov pointedly saying that it would be completely unacceptable, as he called NATO's expansion eastwards a direct threat to the Russian Federation. In the longer term, both countries want to explore further geopolitical and economic cooperation, with Rubio praising extraordinary opportunities, but only if they agree on a peace deal for Ukraine first, the US has said. Volodymyr Zelensky, who met Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan today, said negotiations should not be taking place behind the Ukrainians' backs after the US and Russian officials met in Saudi Arabia. Zelensky, who has now announced that he's postponed his visit to Saudi Arabia until the 10th of March, insists that Europe should be involved in the discussions about the end to the war in Ukraine as well. And Erdogan, for his part, reiterated Turkey's full support for Ukraine's territorial integrity and sovereignty. A big day of diplomacy, but without some major parties at the table, just the US and the Russians. Smacks of the Cold War.
It really does. And this is what we were talking about right before we went on the air. I don't see how they can be holding these talks without Ukraine being involved. This is like being involved in a divorce and not having the children involved. I mean, the Ukraine's got to have a vote in their own sovereignty. Another thing that's come up is that Trump has talked about in order to, if he settles this deal, he wants 50% of all their mineral rights.
That deal wasn't signed the other day ahead of the weekend.
Right.
But they've been talking about it further today, the Ukrainians, and so they do expect that deal to be signed. But of course, there's also the issue that a lot of those wealthy minerals happen to be in areas where Russia might currently hold Ukrainian land, which some cynics were quick to point out that perhaps that might be why they were quicker to talk to the Russians first. But I don't know. I mean, we know that discussions have been going on always with the Ukrainians anyway.
Right.
Not that that's an excuse for what's happened today, but the fact that Russia have been out in the cold for a number of years, and certainly no diplomatic relations under the Biden era, this is the way that Trump has decided to go, because that's the sort of thing that Trump does.
Well, the thing is that everybody knows is how much he loves Putin and how much he kisses up to Putin and wants Putin to be involved in this.
Been a lot of memes.
A lot of memes, and the question is whether or not the door is now open for Putin to come back into the G8. Whether Russia,
well, Trump said he wanted that, didn't he?
Yeah, and so that may happen.
I can't see how that can happen until things are finalised and over. I mean, certainly from what they were saying today, it didn't look like there'd be any normalisation until things were guaranteed, and the conflict was definitely over. I mean, of course, the Russians could end it right now.
They could
just pull out of Ukraine.
Just pull out, but I don't know how much land they want to pull out with. But until Zelensky has a vote, until he's at the table on this thing, I can't see anything happening. Everybody can talk behind his back all they want, but it's just not. It's not right, and I think the EU is going to hold steady to that. And the EU is being very level-headed about this, about looking at who should have a vote in this thing. Otherwise, it could happen to any other country in the EU.
That was a hastily called meeting, though, yesterday. today between those EU leaders following, some quite outrageous comments from visiting US diplomats to Europe last week.
Hey, how quick can you get to Paris?
Yeah, next flight is the way that it looked. Unity is a big positive, like you say, across Europe. And Keir Starmer saying that he would be ready to put boots on the ground in a peacekeeping capacity. It was only really the Swedes and the Dutch that said that they would entertain doing the same. So it's a bit slow to come.
That's an interesting trifecta. It's there. The UK, the Swedes, and the Dutch. It's very interesting.
Yeah, it's a bit slow to come as far as military spending is concerned as well. Spain not changing their view on what they were going to do, and the UK only a couple of percentage more. It's difficult. And, of course, Germany, not very happy, you could tell, with elections imminent, that they didn't want to get into that discussion right now.
No, but all that comes out of Trump's mouth is everybody needs to be contributing more money.
We've discussed this before, and absolutely, you would think that has to be the case in the way the world currently sits.
Well, as long as Putin is back and is getting stronger and stronger, and his stance is very well known, it's probably a good thing, and probably would behoove a lot of countries to increase their military spending a little bit. But,
well, 2% was what they were saying. Yeah. Now they're saying more like 2.5 to 5%. Of course, in the Cold War, we were spending something like 7%.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess the U.S. was spending more because it always has.
Always. Yeah. Always. Can't buy enough guns, baby. Can't buy enough of them.
So that's basically where things stand right now. Of course, though, we'll be hearing more from various different people for their views and thoughts as the day goes on. And Zelensky then calling for fair Ukraine talks, which you can't ask for more than that, can you? But those were the main headlines from that big meeting today, which we were up early to take in, weren't we?
Yeah, glad we started with that.
Yeah, well, bearing in mind, it was over in about 4 hours, so we weren't sure if it was going to drag on or what, but at least we have the headlines from that, so we know where we are on that. Russia saying that there's a mutual desire to start Ukraine peace talks, as the US warned any deal must be acceptable to all sides. Right. Any major changes on that whilst we're on air talking about events in and around and involving the US? We'll bring you up to date with on the way. We'll get a look at some of the other big stories around at the moment. Just as we were putting things together earlier today, the lead story changed with that Delta plane flipping upside down while landing in Toronto from Minneapolis. We were just saying that we hadn't seen any footage of that. Actually, we'd seen the plane on its roof. We hadn't actually seen any footage of it landing. It's now on the TV behind you. That plane crash that took place after a Delta plane flipped upside down after crash landing in Toronto on its way from Minneapolis. We're not quite sure exactly how it happened yet, but it did seem to hit the ground pretty hard.
Well, apparently, according to one of the eyewitnesses, there had been a lot of turbulence, and when they landed, it looks like they may have hit some ice, and the plane turned 90 degrees and was actually skidding on its side, and then I guess flipped at some point. That's
like
the one thing
loose.
I'm a little unclear about when exactly the plane flipped over, but the fact that 80 people all walked away from it. 21 injuries from what we're hearing, but 80 people actually walked away. Wear those seatbelts when you're on the flight. If you don't need any more proof.
They're coming into land for certain.
Yeah. But it was crazy, though.
I mean, it is amazing that nobody was killed. There are a couple of people who are very seriously injured. A man in his 60s and a woman in her 40s who were airlifted to hospital. But walking away from something like that, it's just incredible, isn't it? Especially after we've seen recently, the other air crashes that have taken place.
That seems to be there seems to be an epidemic right now of that sort of stuff.
It seems to happen, doesn't it?
Yes,
you get a number of them all in one go.
We're in the middle of it right now.
Don't know why.
Yep.
All right. This time of year, floods and heavy rain, snow and ice, all sorts for the US. At least 10 dead at the moment as well.
Well, it's that time of the year. It's a time in a lot of these mountainous areas like Kentucky and Georgia, and they really got hit with it, where things are going to flood. And what happens is the snow begins to melt, and I don't think this was the case there, where snow melt was a big issue. But
in Kentucky,
exactly. But going into the end of February, and going into March and April, as I said, when the snow begins to melt, these rivers and creeks are absolutely going to be overflowing. You're going to be seeing this story quite a bit. So FEMA is, if there is going to be a FEMA, it's going to be very,
so
very
far, but you never know.
Yeah. And so this is that time of the year where I swear every week when I'm on the air, we're going to be having flooding stories, at least for the next couple of months.
I suppose the good thing is that Donald Trump declaring on Sunday, or authorizing on Sunday, that FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, to coordinate the disaster relief efforts, means he's not getting rid of it right now.
No, he's really
said he's going to abolish it, but in the past.
Oh, he did, and then I saw an interview with Andy Beshear, who's the Democratic governor of the state, and he said Trump's been great, FEMA's been great. They got their people in there. They're giving them all the aid that they need, and he was very, very complimentary about the way that things are happening right now. So hopefully that'll continue for the next couple of months before he makes any cuts, because these people are really going to need it. It's going to get pretty bad.
Yeah, we just talked about the weather and the situation briefly, but of course back to the situation with that air crash from a few weeks ago in January at Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport. We're on the subject of firing now for real. Trump has begun firing several hundred Federal Aviation Administration employees. Not specifically to do with this particular incident.
No.
But because it's trimming the fat?
Yeah, 400 people, though. But I think that the big problem that a lot of people have is if you have a shortage of air traffic controllers, if you have a shortage of personnel who man radar and landing, navigational, maintenance, that sort of thing, this is a bad time to be cutting back, especially with so many collisions, because they seem to have figured out that the problem with that plane that hit the helicopter in Washington, the problem was one air traffic controller was handling both flights at the same time.
Although
so
they were
understaffed.
Not unusual, we understand, at that time of day for that to happen, whether it's right or wrong.
That's
but
right.
It's not unusual, that situation, we understand.
No, not unusual at all.
The investigation's still not.
But, and so what's happening here is Trump's people are saying that of the 400 FAA employees that were fired, 0 air traffic controllers and critical safety personnel were let go. So I guess
probationary workers, we're hearing. It's just part of a whole slew of these. The Trump administration cutting FDA employees in food safety, medical devices, tobacco products as well. This is Food and Drug Administration,
right, but the bad optic here is you're firing all these people who are involved in safety. Keeping the air safe, keeping the plane safe, keeping everybody landed at one time. My wife said something. We took a quick trip the other day when we were on the plane, and it seems to be a Spanish or a European thing that when the plane lands, people applaud.
It certainly happens in Spain, yeah.
It does happen in Spain. Everybody's about, yay, like they're at Wicked.
Well, thank goodness. We're alive.
Yeah. And this morning she said, you know what, maybe that's not a bad idea. Maybe we ought to give them a round. It's not a thing in the States, applauding when the plane lands.
Not UK, generally.
It is not, but we thought that was kind of an interesting observation. So...
Okay, we've also seen cuts elsewhere, although they've been quick to row back on the nuclear situation. What's this story all about? Because it's almost like you would think that something like this was going to happen with the Department of DOGE, Department of... Yeah. What is it called again?
Government expectorancy.
It's the one that
efficiency.
Efficiency. It's the one
government efficiency.
The one that Mr. Musk is in charge of, so they fired all of these nuclear weapons workers, and they've now realised that we need them.
I think the feeling was that they're all in the Department of Energy, and everybody knows that Trump hates anything to do with global warming or anything to do with climate change. And so he thought he was letting people go who were involved in climate change and green energy and that sort of thing. But no, the Department of Energy handles all the nuclear power plants and let all of these people go. And what happened was he targeted about 2,000 employees. Then they realized, oh no, we're leaving all of our nuclear power plants, and there aren't a lot of them in the States. Just so you know, it's not like Germany and France where they're all over the place. There are I don't know what the exact number would be. There might be 10 or 12 in the whole country. One of them near where I used to live, and so. That really was a big thing. So now they're trying to hire all those people back.
Well, of course, they don't have access to their email accounts, their work email accounts anymore, so they're not quite sure how to get hold of people.
And a lot of those scientists are now saying, nah, I don't feel like coming back. I'll work in the private sector. And a lot of the people who were fired are all younger people because the older people are more entrenched, people who've been there 20, 30 years. And so the younger people come in and they've got a lot of new ideas and they understand the technology. They understand how everything works even more than the older employees do, and those people have been tossed.
Department of Government Efficiency people are coming in with absolutely no knowledge of what these departments are responsible for, the executive director of the Arms Control Association said, referring to Elon Musk's department. But he doesn't actually appear to be a Doge employee either, Mr. Musk.
He's not an employee of anything.
He's not being paid to do this particular job. And there was something that you mentioned that a lot of people have been concerned about is that a number of the people that they're bringing in to, we touched on it last week, for instance, to have access to people's social security numbers and the rest of it are all quite young employees that Musk has dragged in from somewhere within one of his companies.
Musk's main guy to make all the contacts inside the Social Security Administration is 25 years old.
I guess there's nothing wrong with that if somebody knows how to do their job. But it's where things are going wrong that we need to focus on.
Well, he's 40 years away from needing it, so it's easy to walk in. Remember when you were 25, which is what 3 or 4 years ago, when you were 25 and and anybody who was 30 was considered old. Can you imagine, dealing with things that your parents or grandparents have to deal and this is how they get their income and this is how they subsist? It's absolutely insane. At the machete that's being taken to everything, and I think everything ought to be cut with a scalpel. I think there probably is some. There is
wastage.
There's absolutely wastage.
And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's the way. It's the approach.
The way he's doing. That's the whole thing.
Yeah.
And I have talked to people back in the States in my family who said he's doing more than Biden did in 4 years, and I'm going, well. Biden did a lot of stuff that you didn't see, and Trump is very much out there. He wants you to see absolutely everything he's doing because he thinks everything he's doing is good and is going to be applauded, and the whole thing. And that is, of course, not always the case.
A lot of this, and I've seen quite a bit about it. A lot of this wastage actually goes back through a couple of presidencies, even back to Obama. Which means that actually it was there last time Trump was in charge, but he didn't quite have the sort of sweeping power that he has this time around, does he? Trump 2.0 hasn't got any no man. He's all got people.
He doesn't have a bit in his mouth, and he's running around the corral doing whatever he wants to do, and all of his minions are saying he should not be held back at all. He should be able to do exactly what he wants to do. And the fact that certain judges are saying, well, you don't have the power to do this, and the judge is putting the halt on Trump, that is making a lot of people inside the administration crazy, saying that the president should have absolute power over everybody. And everybody remembers Nixon. He tried it, and look where Nixon ended up. So the times have changed, certainly, than they were in 1975.
Interesting, isn't it? We're hearing more about judges standing up to the things that are happening, and not perhaps as much as we might expect from the Democrats still. We've said this now for a couple of weeks. What's going on?
Okay, here's what it is. The Democrats are playing the long game.
Are they?
They are playing I know they're playing the long game on this because, as Hakeem Jeffries, who's a leader of the Democrats in Congress, said, You can't pick a fight for every little thing that happens. You have.
They're not picking a fight on pretty much anything at the moment.
I know, but they're letting
that's their job in opposition, surely.
I understand that, but they are trying to let things play out because we are so early in the game. If you're going to get your back up, if you're going to get all worked up in the first 20 days, can you imagine how you're going to be in the first 2 years? You have to let this thing play out. You have to let the system fail. Because if this happens, then hopefully you'll get to a point where even the Republicans are looking at going, well, we may have made a mistake.
Well, there
here.
are some Republicans who aren't happy with some of the things that have been happening. We know that, certainly.
Yeah. But you have to let this thing play out. You can't get worked up after 3 or 4 weeks. You're just going to make yourself crazy. Let it play out. Let the mistakes be made. It's unfortunate to the people who have lost their jobs. I have a very good expat friend who is from the Pacific Northwest, who his daughter lost her job. She worked for the Forest Service. She lost her job just willy-nilly like that. It was gone. And now she's got to get another job. Fortunately, she found one. And so there is that. I feel badly about that. A lot of people are going to lose their jobs. They're going to lose their homes and that sort of thing. But eventually, the tide has got to turn against the Republican Party where they go, too many people being harmed by this, that maybe we ought to kind of take another look at it. It's just we're not at that tipping point yet, in my humble opinion.
And yes, we mentioned the reaction from European leaders last week. J.D. Vance's speech in Munich showing that Trump 2.0 is far more disruptive and chaotic than their worst fears. The number of the leaders speaking out afterwards. Christian Frossard-Detour said that Europe needs to try and calm things down. There's a lot of hot air, not much clarity about what the US is saying and what it's expecting. Let's make sure we're not reacting to the wrong things. We cannot do without the Americans. They're throwing things a bit up in the air, but it's our responsibility to catch them, to bring them down and not keep them in the air. That's the Prime Minister of Iceland, which I thought was probably the best way to look at it.
I know, and I also like what the Finnish president, Alexander Stubb, said. We Finns in this situation are cool, calm, and collected, and what we do is have an ice bath, and after that, we go to the sauna, and then we reflect. He said, it's a cacophony of head up and shock diplomacy. We need to talk less and do more. Amen.
We covered the campaign as Trump was vying to come back into power. When we looked at all of the candidates and all of the different people that were saying different things at a different time, and I wonder whether how much Europe and people in Europe had actually realised how much was being said throughout that campaign and how. But when the US Vice President visits Dachau concentration camp. And then, in effect, endorses the Alternative for Deutschland party just before the German polls, you can perhaps understand why people were rather angry.
Well, part of the problem seems to be that there are a lot of members of the Trump team who are sticking their foot in it big time. Like Vance speaks with one voice, and then Marco Rubio, who's Secretary of State, he speaks with another voice, and everything.
You had three different points of view within the same 24 hours,
and especially
all spoken in Europe.
Hegseth. The Secretary of Defense, all three of these guys are speaking slightly different things, but they're all really strong-armed. We're not doing it unless such and such happens.
But it was also big issues, ahead of any talks whatsoever, things like no way Ukraine can join NATO and things like you're not going to get all the land back. I mean, those are things you're giving up way ahead of even speaking to Putin or even ahead of today's meeting.
Well, you're saying things like that.
What?
And then you're saying, we hope to have Ukraine involved, and Zelensky's going, wait a minute today. Wait a minute, boys. I'm sitting over here. So it's all very crazy. But it's funny that the Trump team is not speaking with one voice, and yet Europe is. I'm finding that the members of the EU are really, really...
Well, they're trying. We don't have total agreement on exactly
not total agreement, but a lot of them are developing a backbone on this.
And it's a bit strange, isn't it? Because you've got Europe body, a landmass, and then you've got the European Union. So it's slightly different.
That's true.
Ursula von der Leyen speaking basically for the EU, and then of course you've got Sir Keir Starmer speaking on behalf of Britain and also speaking on behalf of of Europe. And in fact, he's going to be the first European man to visit Donald Trump next week, and perhaps there will be some messaging going on there. We highlighted earlier what's been said today as far as Sir Keir Starmer is concerned about boots on the ground in a peacekeeping scenario. So we won't go back over that again. But that was strange. And how was it sort of portrayed in the US, where you've got these three, big members of the Trump team saying different things?
I don't really know how it's being perceived back there, but clearly they need to be singing from the same hymnal. And what that right now, the only hymnal they sing from is the Trump one. And I'd love to be behind closed doors to see what Trump is saying to each one of those three, going, that's not what I want to do.
I know what Rubio said.
Yeah.
Rubio said he was told to get things done. And he says, if I don't get things done, he's asking me the next day already why I haven't got it done. And he means things like ending the war.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true. So,
he wants immediate results.
Yeah, and there's no question that the EU and the European leaders in general are afraid of what's going on, because a whole relationship that presidents for years and years and years were building on to try to develop a closer relationship with Europe and with the rest of the world, that is being broken up. The rules have completely changed. But
it's also allowing Sergei Lavrov to say things like, Europe aren't interested, they want the war to continue, which is complete and utter rubbish, obviously. Anyway, well, there'll be plenty more said about it all. Let's move on then. We had that clip once, didn't we, where some people have been suggesting that Trump was like Hitler, and then he did it, didn't he? Like at that meeting where it's like, he's Hitler. But this week it wasn't Hitler at all. It was another previous European leader. He was under fire for likening himself to Napoleon with the attacks on judges. The president said, he who saves his country does not violate any laws. And that quote was attributed to Napoleon.
Yeah, his defiance of some of those orders, including the restoration of funding to bodies like the National Institutes of Health, have led to a lot of his opponents declaring a constitutional crisis. And it's not just the Democrats. A lot of bureaucrats are saying this attempt at just doing whatever you want without any regard to the law is completely wrong. That the U.S. does have three equal branches of government. The legislative, the executive, and the judicial, and they're supposed to exist as checks and balances on each other. But right now, Trump is just running wildly over the other two branches, almost daring everybody to sue him, daring him to slow him down. And my guess is that's going to continue probably for the next 4 years. I mean, he genuinely doesn't care. He generally sees himself as Napoleon, and he thinks Napoleon was a great man. We talked.
He respects strength, doesn't he? Much like President Putin apparently respects
very much
strength. And we've talked a little bit about the cost cutting and so on, but there is the argument that the structures of U.S. democracy are just being pulled down.
Yeah, they're completely shredded. The rules have completely changed in the past 3 weeks.
It's a coup.
It is a coup. It absolutely is a coup. Because he and Musk are, trying to slash billions of dollars from federal spending. That's one way to do it. I mean, if anybody who's worked for a company, when you walk in the door or join a firm, you're frequently told you're going to have to make some cuts, look at the budget.
Well, he famously walked into Twitter with the kitchen sink, didn't he?
Yeah. Yeah, oh, that's right. I completely had forgotten that he did that. But no matter where you work, your boss is always going to ask you at some point or other that you're going to have to make some cuts, that it's going to hurt a little bit, and you kind of understand that. Some people may have actually lost their jobs at a certain point in your life, and it really hurts. But to walk in with a machete and just be cutting people like crazy, it's going to get worse before it gets better. I think.
All right. Well, we'll move away from that as much as we can. Sticking with Trump, though, there's been plenty of memes about all of this as well. Of course, the Gulf of America, Fort Bragg, all of these name changes taking place. I even saw Gulf of Yorkshire, the North Sea, the other, which I thought was quite hilarious. Yeah, we've seen quite a lot of this going on. What's behind all of these name changes? I got the Gulf of Mexico thing. I kind of understand, but what about the rest of it?
Well, it's happened for a long time. A president will put his stamp on what he feels is important and change the name of certain geographical things, which he's able to do. Obama was the one that changed Mount McKinley, which was named after President McKinley, who died in 1901. And was very much like Trump in that he expanded it. He's the guy that created the Panama Canal, and he had a different relationship with the Philippines. And what's happened here is Obama changed Mount McKinley to Mount Denali.
What's the Native American name?
And it's a Native American name. And it was very, very important to the people who live in Alaska. And so that nobody seemed to care too much about that. I don't know where he feels he gets the authority to change a body of water that is shared by a number of countries. Clearly,
well, actually, Mexico have now said they're going to sue because they think legally they can prove that it only goes so far.
And that's right, and
to the continental shelf.
I think there's another story at play here that a lot of our listeners may have already clued in on. Is that a member of the Associated Press? The Associated Press furnishes news and information to hundreds of news gathering organizations. They refuse to call it the Gulf of America. They call it the Gulf of Mexico. So Trump made it so nobody from the AP can appear in the Oval Office for any sort of press conference. It's called, what is it, a big baby? He's being just a huge baby about this. Anybody that defies him, anybody who says, hey, I don't agree with what you're doing, all of a sudden you're out. You can't do your job. You can't cover the news. And I just think that's a bad way of doing business. So so I was just to wrap up. There are a lot of presidents who do this thing, who rename things, never to the point of what he's doing. And the renaming of Fort Bragg was named after a Southern general. And anybody who may have heard that, after the George Floyd thing a couple of years ago, anything to do with the South seemed to have been, and the Confederacy's monuments went down. It was weird when I was in New Orleans a few months ago, a city I lived in for a long time, and to see a lot of the statues down from Confederate generals were now just artwork, pieces of sculpture and that sorts of things. It's it's a big thing.
Nationalist, imperialist vision of the United States.
Exactly.
One commentator said. University of Wisconsin, Madison, studying political rhetoric. That was Alison Prash, professor there, who made that quote. All right. Wow. We have plenty more.
That's
we
it.
ain't got the time.
Can we go another hour? Let's go.
We could.
Next week.
Okay, right. We'll see where we are next week. You're not with us next week, actually.
I'm not here next week.
With us a week next Tuesday.